10 years ago, every startup was like, hopefully we don't get killed by Apple. A similar thing happening with ChatGPT.
What is that cost benefit analysis of being an early employee at a startup?
Not the best deal if you're looking for cash. But if you're looking for learning, it's like the best deal. You have to be empathetic to the fact that capitalism does sort of destroy certain jobs, but like it gets us somewhere. And as a consumer, it's going to be a lot better. If you think about like the cost of a lot of goods, it's labor and materials, right? So half of that is going to go to zero over time. Like we could be in a world that could be much more prosperous, but also would have a lot of people not working. Society is very scared of that. Isaac Asimov has a great sort of short story. Basically, there's these machines that run the world. My guess is 100 years from now, you may have one country that has like some AI, open source kind of published AI models, looks at the internet, looks at the data and says like, the interest rate change. I think Balaji is a super honest, good guy. He really believes governments being able to print money willy-nilly will eventually not work. Bitcoin seems to be like sort of the best alternative. The artists are chosen by the audience. You are making content for the algorithm in a way. TikTok is doing what Americans want.
Sahil, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am so excited to have you here today. You are such a multifaceted person. In my view, you were the second employee at Pinterest. You are running a company called Gumroad. You code AI projects on the side. You invest. You've written a book. You paint. So I think you're a true Renaissance man. And there's a lot that I'm very much looking forward to diving in today with you. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
I think just to dive into it and kind of start at the very beginning, what was your childhood like? What brought you into technology?
Yeah, I got into tech, I think like a lot of 13-year-old kids, like playing video games and wanting to, I don't know, interface with other people, and finding like forums online and building an identity and realizing that there was like a visual aspect to it. And so I pirated Photoshop and started like making logos and signatures and just wanted to like just like content creation, right? Like what lots of people do now, but the early days of this, right before the iPhone, before Instagram, you would go online and participate in forums, and eventually started doing freelance work. There was like one of the categories of the forum was like jobs, job postings, and people would pay like $5. This is before Fiverr and Upwork, but they would pay money. And I grew up in Singapore, so the only way really for me to accept money on the internet was PayPal. So I created a PayPal account and would start doing, freelance web design and graphic design for probably like $5 an hour or something like that. That money would go into my PayPal account. I didn't have a bank account because I was like 13 years old. And so I would just have to spend it using, on websites that shipped to Singapore, which was not very many, and accepted PayPal. So basically I would buy Xbox games. That was like where the money would go. And then I don't really know, honestly, like how I got into startups. But I think it had to do something with, TechCrunch or Y Combinator, or learning that there was just like this industry, kind of like, how maybe you would be into filmmaking and you learn about Hollywood or something, right? I applied when I went to college. I went to USC primarily because it was the closest university I got into that was like, near Silicon Valley. And then I realized even when I got to USC that most people there like didn't know what Hacker News was or venture capital. It was still like 2010. Still super early. And so I knew I had to work for a startup and like work for a Y Combinator startup. That was like, my, that's what I thought like the, the sort of the center of the universe was. And so I started freelancing, posting my work on Hacker News. I started a blog. I felt like that was one way to get the word out. I started a Twitter account and sort of commenting on Hacker News and all these things. And then Ben from Pinterest reached out to me and said, "Hey, I saw your work online. We have this, we're working on this thing called Pinterest. We need an iPhone app. You seem like you can build stuff. Do you want to help us out?" And so as a freshman at USC, I started doing iOS development for them. I think I charged like $8,000 or something. Anyway, yeah, like that turned into a full-time job offer.
And Why did you
You know,
decide? Like, I feel you're probably seeing a lot of different sort of like projects and companies popping up at that point. What made you decide, like, okay, this is worth leaving school? What was kind of going on at Pinterest that signaled to you this is going to be a great company?
yeah, I mean, Pinterest ended up working out, but I still don't know if it was luck or not or whatever. I but on a just more broad basis, I felt like I was in school because I wanted to get a job in startups. And so like if I could get a job in startups at that point, what was I in like I just was
Yeah,
like what am I
it
paying
was a
50,000?
means to an end, and you got to the end.
Yeah, like I was in school. I did plan to go like when I went to USC, I was like, I'm going to graduate, right? I'm going to graduate, and then I'm going to go get a job at Google, and then I'm going to go get a job at a small, medium-sized company, and then I'm going to get a job at a startup, and then I'm going to start a company. Like that was like my,
Yeah.
my path. I thought, and then Ben from Pinterest basically was like, hey, do you want to try skipping the first 15 years of that, basically?
I guess you probably moved to Silicon Valley at that point, right?
Yeah, I moved to Palo Alto. Yeah, so yeah,
You were like
January 20.
you were kind of like living that tech dream that you had been sort of searching for since you were younger. And how was it while you were there? Like at the early days of print Pinterest, sort of building it from the ground up.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was almost like most startups are, right? Which is you have I mean, now there's remote work and things, but back then it was basically a room in Palo Alto, and some IKEA desks that people probably can even draw, like they're so familiar to people. Uh, and Herman Miller Aeron chairs, because for whatever reason that's like the expense people are willing to splurge on at startups. Uh, and some MacBook, and then like just like people typing, right? And like that like could be a legal firm. It could be like this is one of the things I think is so fascinating about startups is like it's all in like the head. Like
Mhm.
it's all like it doesn't physically look like anything special. And so when I describe it to people, I'm like, well, it's just like a bunch of people just like working on something, and then it was just growing really fast. Like that was different, right? We had probably more servers or more people
Mhm.
signing up or whatever, but like when you go to like OpenAI's office or AngelList's office or Dropbox, and this is something I think you like. What's cool about I think, you know, being in this space is realize it takes away the magic in a way that I think is healthy, um, because it makes you believe you can do it too. Doing the first version of that is the first version of that is always really simple, right? It's always like uh, there's like a Gall's law of systems design, which is like basically all complicated big systems like start as small, simple systems first. Like you don't like architect some amazing thing
Yeah.
generally. You like have a thing and then you make it better and better and better and better and better and better. And like you do that for a long period of
Yeah.
time. And like then you end up with something that is like ChatGPT is walking around and doing the laundry for you, you know. But it
Yeah.
started as like a chat bot on a website, right? On a
Yeah.
subdomain. Like it doesn't even have a domain yet, right? Um, and people are like all worried about all sorts of things. Like the most successful startup in the last 5 years like doesn't even have a
Yeah.
domain.
Were you interested in starting a company while you were at Pinterest?
Definitely. Yeah. And one of the reasons, honestly, I joined Pinterest and I was really excited about working there was because they were like super cool with that. A lot of people I talk to, you're like, they're not super cool with that. But Ben especially was. And so, for example, I remember when Matt Kohler pitched, or I guess, Pinterest pitched Mark, Matt Kohler at Benchmark. And it was like Ben and Paul, I think, pitching Matt and me in the like the bedroom of the office, uh and that was like amazing, right? Like to get a view of like what that even looks like Benchmark, one of the best firms in the world, and then whatever. It just really was amazing. So yeah, I always felt like knew I wanted to build my own stuff, and like truthfully, like building a company, like once you have product market fit, and one of the reasons I left Pinterest, like it just gets kind of boring.
Yeah.
It's no longer that difficult. Like it's still hard. I'm not saying it isn't hard, but it's not like creatively difficult, right? Like it's not like you wake up and you're like, am I gonna like how are we gonna make this happen? Like the idea is Pinterest was just growing so fast that it was kind of like, okay, we just need to scale, we just need to do what we're doing, we just need to add comments and need to add
So you
reporting.
were you were more interested in chasing those like difficult problems or like solving that.
Yeah, basically the way I put it to myself was just sort of uh microeconomics was comparative advantage, right? Like someone else could do, like very few people want to start companies and feel like, software engineers want to do that. Uh, and so like I should go do that. And all of the software engineers, of which there are many, many of them who want to work at a high growth startup and they can kind of just make sure the site stays up, can take my job. Like I
Yeah.
just felt like my skills were not really being utilized in the most sort of valuable way for myself or for society.
One question on that. How do you think like when you're talking to other people or people ask you for advice, like what is that like cost benefit analysis of like being an early employee at a startup versus going off to start your own company? Because on one hand, I guess it's way less upside if you're an earlier employee, but just as much risk. So it doesn't make sense. But also it sounds like you had like such invaluable learning that it was like a very key step on your sort of
Yeah.
career trajectory.
Well, I think it's kind of like rock paper scissors or something, where there's like just different things that matter at different points for different people. And so being an early employee, for example, is not the best deal if you're looking for cash. Like, and it's probably not the best deal if you're looking for like sort of lifestyle. But if you're looking for learning, it's like the best deal, and so I feel like it's just it's just you sort of like maximize learning and sacrifice lifestyle and money in the short term, at least. Versus maybe at a big company, you're kind of maximizing, minimizing learning potentially, but like or like you're learning, but you're really maximizing for money. Um, uh, but you have to work versus, a job that's super lifestyle, but then you don't have to, you're really down on
Working in a
the
big tech company or what it used to be
yes.
like working at a big tech company.
Yeah, what are you exactly making TikToks or whatever, saying you were right.
Yeah.
So that yeah, and I had a tweet about this like many years ago, and it was like one of my first viral within the tech industry tweets, like in 2008 or 2018 or 19 or something. Paul Graham replied because he was really mad. But basically, I said like, being an early employee doesn't really make any financial sense. Uh, just risk reward wise, I think the biggest issue in my mind to critique it a little bit would be that you're taking so much risk as an early employee, almost as much relative, in terms of how likely the company is to actually succeed as the founders, but you're generally getting like 100th
Yeah.
of the stock. However, I think maybe just to take the opposite view, it's less about risk and it's more about, are you willing to actually just do it? Like a lot of the time, it's just, yeah, being a founder is like kind of annoying. Like you just have to you're kind of the janitor for the company. Like, you kind of have to do all the stuff that isn't the other jobs because there's always going to be a bunch of random stuff you kind of have to do. And like, that's, something that a lot of people don't want to deal with. And so, people are willing to, give up potentially owning half the company or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, but I do think being an early employee was what, like at Pinterest, like Pinterest was one of the few companies that being an early employee would have been a really, really good deal. But
Yes,
even for me,
that's very rare.
yeah, super,
Totally.
super, super rare. You're also putting all your eggs in one basket. Yeah, you're also like sort of the liquidity is not up to you. You could work at a company for 10 years and not have any liquidity. So there's just a bunch of things that I think being an early employee feels not the best sort of situation, which is kind of why at Gumroad we kind of try to run things a little bit differently. We have a lot of contractors and we give all the contractors equity, and
Oh,
uh,
interesting.
I want to weight the compensation more and more toward the equity piece over time. Um, but yeah, I think definitely the early employee sort of, it still seems to work, even though it's not like maybe the best paid position or the most like rewarded risk adjusted wise,
Yeah.
just because there are people like me who need to learn and want to learn. And frankly, like, a lot of people are like, Elon's Twitter is insane, but there's like enough people like me who are like, that would be fun for like a
Totally.
year. And I would learn a lot. And like, I'm not saying anything about like my, strong opinions of Elon or anything. I think it would be an amazing learning experience. And I would be
Definitely.
willing to, to deal with a lot of crap, uh, to just be in a, kind of that kind of place for
Yeah.
myself. I just value that a lot.
By the way, I agree. I think it's actually a very interesting place to work right now. It seems really intense. So, when you left Pinterest and you decided to go full time on Gumroad, um, like what was your vision for Gumroad? Like, and what did it kind of become today?
Yeah, so initially I wanted to sell some icons I designed in Photoshop to my Twitter audience. This pencil icon I designed, and there was like no easy way for me to do that. And this made sense because at the time in 2011, everyone who wanted to sell stuff like had a website. You know, they could easily integrate PayPal into it. But I just had a Twitter account, and I had built my audience primarily from like commenting on Hacker News, and there was just no easy way for me to like put a link directly in the tweet and you could just buy the thing. Like you needed a website, and I was just like, this is kind of doesn't make sense. Uh, but I also had like this understanding that like I was early in this like wave of, people who were building audiences, but also didn't have a website. It was like a weird sort of reversal. And so Gumroad sort of solved that problem. It was like, okay, I need this. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of other people who also need this. Right. And I don't know how large that TAM, quote unquote, is, but there's probably going to be more. And so I built Gumroad. I think I had the idea like Friday night. I ended up that weekend just building it, and then I launched it Monday morning, tweeting about that pencil icon. And to be honest, like since then, it hasn't changed that much. Like it has a lot of the same characteristics. I think the most important thing is that it should be just as easy to sell something. And now with ChatGPT plugins, maybe they should be able to go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I have a Discord community. I want to charge $10 a month for it. Like, create the Gumroad product."
Do you think it's a risk to certain creators on your platform, or like how do you view this as sort of, it feels like so many digital services are getting eaten up, especially kind of on the creative side?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I've always had this fear for Gumroad that eventually, like, information becomes free, or the content you can get directly from the source or from YouTube or Wikipedia or something like that. And even now with ChatGPT, it's like, like if you want to lose weight, like just ask ChatGPT, like, right? But the truth is like there's still, I think, like that sort of epistemological need for like curation of knowledge where you just get hit with like tons of stuff, and it's like if you don't speak Spanish, it all sounds the same, right? And so you need someone to kind of digest it for you if you're learning something new. So I feel like that's always going to be a thing. And I've heard of, maybe this is what people were saying with the internet. Like, why would anyone need libraries? Why would anyone need librarians? Why would anyone need schools? Why would anyone need teachers? Yeah, why? I don't know, but it
We
seems
do.
like it seems like yeah, maybe like one, like maybe like Isaac Newton doesn't need any of those things, right? But like if you're a kid, you need a teacher. You need, like, these are bundled roles in society, and I think like there's sort of a lot that goes into these things that we just think, oh, it's just a person who like locks the door. But it's like, no, there's a lot of things that that person does that you don't really express in the language, or something. They're just kind of assumptions.
You tweeted something about how like you don't need to go to art school anymore, in the sense like more people don't need the technical skills that take years to obtain, to produce something beautiful. And I'm just curious,
Yeah.
like how do you think about how creativity, or like being able to produce creative things, is changing both for artists and like non-artists? That's just a
Yeah.
big question.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally the quality, maybe quality might not be the right word, but the general like quality of the work will get better, basically, right? Like for example, uh, my wife works at like animation. They make stop motion feature films. Started with Coraline, and every movie they make, they get more ambitious, right? They like figure out how to do like the movie in the house, and then they kind of scale, and they like they have big boat scenes, and with missing link and stuff. But like, why? Well, the technology gets better. They're in search of novelty. They want to win an Oscar, like whatever it may be. But there's a drive. There's also like generally, as the content gets better, more people want to consume the content, right? Like one of the largest entertainment industries is video games, right? Video games is like 10 or something times larger than even movies, uh, and and they're also just 10 times more expensive to make. I mean, like making a video game versus a movie is, you have to have dialogue, you have to have like interactivity, AI, like enemies, like all this stuff on top of the movie, of the script of the game, right? Um, and so like I could also just see that like maybe the form of the content changes, where like maybe video games becomes like much more popular as a way of consumption, or like things become just more interactive,
Yeah.
generally. It's just like, for example, like a movie was like just plays before, like plays became movies, right? And there's still
Yeah.
plays. And so maybe like that sort of the theater, that sort of what we do in the theater, it's really just like a gathering place in a box, like that, it used to be we watch plays or operas, and then, like millennials will continue to watch movies in there, but maybe, Gen Z will like, have interactive video games that they do
Yeah.
or
Or
whatever.
use
Or
VR.
the new types of content, or like just like the podcast, like how
Yeah.
like the podcast isn't a thing that like existed like 15
I
years ago.
mean, also, even on the podcast front, like I've recently spoken to companies that are doing such cool things where it's like you can basically design your own podcast you want to listen to. You take a
Yeah,
voice,
I just had an idea for
you
a
take a
podcast.
style. Like I
Yeah,
think it's going to be people can actually. We were speaking earlier about like how everyone consumes so much content. I think that's probably that trend is only going to increase because the content is going to get so good and personalized to exactly what you want. I think like a question I have is you are running Gumroad and you also continue to build AI projects on the side. I think there are a lot of people that see this sort of paradigm shift and this new wave of opportunity in AI, and they're searching for places to build, but it kind of feels like things are moving so fast that so many companies get like quickly um unvalidated when like an incumbent goes in and like launches something. And I think, that's happened a lot recently. I guess like where do you think the opportunities to build are in AI that will actually still be relevant or non-obsolete in 5 years?
yeah, it feels a little bit like, I think that the term I saw was the lightning storm, where like you're alive 1 second and dead the next. And like you don't really know where the lightning is going to strike. I remember feeling like this, in 10 years ago, it's like 2011, 2012, where every Apple keynote, every startup was like, hopefully we don't get killed by Apple. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely a similar thing happening with ChatGPT and things like that. um but there's still, I mean, I really just go back to like the simple heuristic of like help people save time, save money, make money. I just keep thinking about, ultimately that's like the value of technology, is to help, it's just save energy, save time, save money, automate something that is manual and annoying. There's all the other industries do plenty of awesome creation stuff. You make medicine or housing or roads or whatever, but like, or content, but like generally, like I feel like the tech industry, at least what I do on a daily basis, like make things really easy, really fast, really
Yeah.
cheap, right? And so
Which
I
AI
just,
companies are most exciting to you right now? Besides, I guess, like OpenAI.
yeah, I mean, as I build stuff, I'm just trying to pay attention to like the interesting infrastructure companies, I guess, that are getting built. Like if I feel like there's a sort of, you build 5 projects and you're still doing some of the same stuff the same, 5 times over. So there's a couple companies in the sort of database for, vector search database companies, like Chroma, or um, Pinecone is another one, FISS. So there's a bunch of companies in that space. I think the hosting companies are going to do really well. And like if, imagine it gets a lot easier to build apps. Well, there's like, that means 10x or 100x more apps that need to get hosted in places, right? So I think companies like Replit, Heroku by, Salesforce, I think are in a good position. Render, um, consumer AI companies, I still think it's tough. Like I even the startups that are consumer, like I guess Midjourney, Character AI, Replica, like they're I don't know. It's very hard for like I have such an indie hacker view of it, where I'm like, what can I build? That like I don't
Yeah.
think about like what do I need $50 million to go build? Um, so if I were like, if I had a friend who's like, hey, I want to make like $200,000 a year, like building some, just like in SaaS, building some AI tool, I would basically just tell them to like walk around their neighborhood, like go to as many businesses as possible and just see like what manual thing or what piece of paper they sign, or like, and just like figure out how to automate that. And you might not even need GPT-4 to do it. You might not need like a lot of automation. I was talking to some LPs in my fund earlier today, and I was just showing them like some Python scripts I wrote. Like, for example, it, one thing I do is I like make sure that the Gumroad roadmap is up to date, which means
Mm.
paying a bunch of people who work at Gumroad. If there's not an update every 2 weeks, I'm like, hey, what's up? That's like a completely robotic task that I like get paid to do. Like, as part of my job, I have to like do this thing. And so I wrote a script that just does it for me, right? And that's something that maybe took me 15 or 20 minutes like every week to just make sure that everything was up to date. And now it's automated. It takes me zero time, right? And so take my hourly rate times that. And so it's just like finding those things that exist in companies and doing them,
Yeah.
right? At
Yeah.
Gumroad, for example, I'm currently writing internal software to automate our like support queue,
Mm.
where we get 200 tickets a day, 6,000 tickets a month, and I actually have it running already. People are using it, so I can say that like it saves us hours every single day, because it basically takes a lot of the uncreative work. Like, so let's say someone emails in and says, "Hey, I tried to buy this product, but it didn't work. Why? What happened? What can I do?" Well, like we can, like the customer support person has to like go into the admin, look up their email, look up their purchase, look up the error code in Stripe, and then like format that as a human, and then tell them, hey, blah blah blah, right? The card didn't
Yeah.
work because the declined by the bank. Call your bank. That takes 5 minutes. GPT-4 or encode, it could, even if the code takes 5 minutes, it was asynchronous, like a robot did it, right?
Yeah.
And so that's effectively like 5 minutes that we get back, right? Multiplied by the hourly rate of the person.
And that's like an interesting product, right? But it's like you're not
Yeah,
just searching for ideas to build. It's like you're sort of just like finding problems and working on them, and like that's sort of a potentially like
it's super
better
hard. It's so
route of
hard to like
finding.
predict. Yeah, like I really have a hard time. I think some people can do it, but I'm not like, oh, I'm gonna come up with like $1 billion company, like on a shrooms trip or something, right? Like, no, like what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna like live my life, and then I'm gonna be annoyed because, like, for example, I was thinking like earlier, yesterday now I was thinking like, what would I build? Like, what's like annoying? Like, what do I? And the best way, by the way, to find out what annoys you is to go to your to do list, because like those are the things you really don't want to do. And so if you go to my to do list, at the very top, I have to book flights. I have to like book flights to SF or whatever. And like, why? That's not hard to do. It only takes like 10 minutes, but it
It's like the
requires a lot.
last thing that always gets carried over each day.
Yeah, it's kind of a pain in the ass. You just have to. It's like fight or flight gets triggered for whatever reason. You have to sit down. You have to context, calendar, like whatever. You got to just do it. Uh, like, so that, that's kind of what I would think about, is like, I'm not, I'd be like, can I build a ChatGPT for, whatever plugin that makes it so that I can like really easily book a flight, or I can automate at least like the email that gets sent to
Well, I
me
guess like
every.
the Expedia plugin thing
Yeah,
now, maybe that'll end up being like that. Another interesting thing that someone said, oh yeah,
I'm just saying, like, I think I would not worry too much about getting struck by lightning, I
yeah,
guess, right? Like, at the end
like
of the
just
day, you don't
pursue it.
know, and just do it. Just like, if you're like, and one of the really great things about building like solving your own problems, is that you win anyway. Like, you're like I don't have to do the thing.
You have these really strong coding skills, which I feel like have like consistently allowed you to be the one that's like not just like searching for ideas from afar, but instead like spend a weekend working on something. And if it's actually not that interesting to you by the end of it, you'll know. I think, I mean, I guess like the ideal founder type is always someone that has those skills, but also has the skills to like build and run a company. I think, do you think most people will need to learn how to code in 10 years or 5 years?
I would say like it would be wrong to bet against. Like, I could read some really amazing, compelling reasons for why you shouldn't learn how to code anymore, or like it won't be necessary in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. But I just feel like it's kind of like cope in a way, where like you might be right, uh, but like, like the default is that the thing that, something that has been important will continue to be important. Something that, like I would just be more likely to assume that.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
probably even the language in which you can communicate your thoughts, like you kind of actually need that fundamental
Yeah,
understanding.
like for example, like one takeaway I feel like I've had is that there is definitely a new skill called prompt engineering, which allows people to like write pseudocode or English that kind of becomes code or becomes like the output. Uh, but what I've found is maybe I'm just this is my own bias speaking, but generally the better a software engineer you are, the better a prompt engineer you are. Like I've
Mm,
never met someone who can't code who's the best prompt engineer ever. Like generally, if you because like prompt engineering is really just like when you use Google, if you understand a little bit about how Google is thinking, you're able to sort of format your Google. And this is something everyone learns, right,
yeah.
over time. You just kind of like intuitively start to learn like how to search, how to how other people talk, how you want to look stuff up on Twitter, things like that. So I think, but like there is value still to I think just a little bit of like my in my ideal world, like I think one problem we have is we have a field called computer science, right? Which is science, but actually it's like there's a very different thing that you generally do, which is you're a software engineer, which is you're really just a web application developer, which is kind of like a blue collar job. Like it's very much like you're just a writer. You're not doing science. You're not contributing. Some people are software engineers who are contributing to science, but it's not the majority, right? It's not.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between an architect and like a civil engineer or something like
Yeah.
that. And so I
Well,
think we should teach everyone civil engineering, like how to build a house. We should teach everyone carpentry. We should teach everyone software engineering. But does that mean and I think knowing enough of that will get you to be able to use ChatGPT for all that kind of stuff super
yeah.
well. You
Well, I
don't
think
have to
it's
become
interesting because my friends that like recently graduated that for example, they like got software engineering jobs at like Twitter and then they got laid off and then it's sort of like feels like their job might actually be like not as relevant. You're not like an ML engineer. And it's sort of like, okay, what do I do now or what are the right skills to
yeah
invest in for the next year to set me up well? I think it's like a confusing time for people that are in those
yeah.
positions.
I think I am in a when you're the CEO of a company or the owner of a business generally, you're rewarded for being a generalist because ultimately that like you can always hire specialists, right? And so you can kind of fill in the gaps. Um, and two, all innovate like all sort of tech efficiency innovation eventually flows back to the owners of the company in forms of like the company becoming more valuable. And so I think the worry is that there are many people who are like being automated or like their jobs are getting compressed, but they don't necessarily see like how they're like how that benefits them, right? And I think software engineering it's going to be super weird because on one hand there's going to be a lot more software engineers, but then there's going to be a lot like those software engineers are going to be a lot more productive. So like how many basically are they going to be getting paid more or less? Um, to be honest, I really believe they're going to be paid a lot less, frankly. And the reason is like just like me, the CEOs of the companies will be so much more efficient that just generally, if you aren't an owner of the company, you just won't be as necessary, right?
Yeah.
Like for example, who benefits the most from like Figma releasing an AI design tool? The CEOs of all the companies who hire designers, who are like, I can just design stuff myself instead of having a team of designers do this, right? And of course, again, like we're not going to like let every designer go, but all of a sudden you have to be really freaking good.
You tweeted something that was like AI ethics is about getting AI into everyone's hands ASAP. I think the flip side of that debate is that these tools are so powerful that as some of the things being worked on get released, it sort of opens up like deep fakes to a whole new level. It opens up how easily it is to develop like basically gene targeting, like biowarfare. There's so many
Yeah.
crazy potential, very sort of dystopian outcomes. But I guess just like, how do you think about this very powerful technology just like being released into the world and versus
Yeah.
like a few of these gatekeepers like Sam Altman and a couple people having like immense power? I guess both will happen.
I think both will happen, right? Where you will end up with this technology in the hands of everybody, but the delivery mechanism of the technology is going to be controlled by some gatekeepers, right? And I think this is kind of like what happens with lots of technology, and why like I am not super concerned, frankly, about like sort of misuse, is because like it seems like the people who generally make the technology are quite mindful about how the technology gets used, and the the difficulty of actually pulling off the technology means that very few people are actually capable of it, right? So for example, with AI, just like for example, let's say open AI gets hacked and like all the code to build your own GPT-4 is literally like completely out there and you just have to do it. Well, how many people are going to do it? I mean, it's like probably zero. I mean, like maybe like some team in China is, or Russia, or like yeah, like maybe some people. And how, when will they ship it? Months, year? Like they have to get million G. Where are they going to get the GPUs? They like it's like they have to run the code in places. Like they have to get, like everyone's going to know like they're doing this.
I guess on Twitter, like Yudkowsky is like kind of blowing up, and there's this like very dystopian narrative that I feel like that narrative has gotten a lot of attention of like how scary it is and sort of worst case scenarios. If you take like
Yeah.
not even utopian, but just like the best case scenario of AGI, or just like AI being inputted into almost every aspect of our life in 20 years, like what is that best case scenario? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's good to be scared. I think it's always healthy to have, some percent of the population freak out, so that some people should be having that role, because yeah, sometimes technology people get too optimistic or whatever. So it's good to have a little bit of that. But I mean, in terms of like, what does the world look like? I mean, every prediction is going to sound so bad, like so dumb in hindsight, I think. Um, but I do think like one thesis I use in investing, which sounds kind of stupid, is, but I tell my LP is like I think that humans will get what they want,
Mm.
which basically like generally like there seems to be a trend of like people want something and then eventually like they get it. Like it's like, oh, you want to be able to talk to people halfway around the world, and then you get it. So you just kind of think about, what do you want, and like what do humans want, and my guess is like we'll start to get those things over time, right? So for example, like I would love to be able to fly from where I live currently in Portland to New York in 2 hours. My guess is that will happen. It might take 20 years, it might take 50 years, it might take 100 years, but my guess is like at some point I will be able to fly from Portland to, like, maybe it's, we take, rocket goes up and down, maybe there's like supersonic, I don't know, maybe there's a train that goes super fast, I don't know. But
I
my
think
guess
that's
is,
such an interesting example because I actually I point to the the Concorde used to essentially allow people to faster travel, and I always think about the Concorde as like an incredibly unique example of when humans created something that made our life more efficient and then we gave it up for a period of
very,
time. I think we'll have it again very soon, but I do always think like that sticks out. There's, depression and mental health associated with social media. There's all these other like things that are a little bit negative with, there's, emissions in cars, all this stuff, but it's like it doesn't mean, I don't think that's a valid reason to give up something that helps
yeah.
us, or makes our life more efficient or interesting or whatever. I always think flying though is this like very weird example of when we did give something up.
Yeah, it is true. That is weird. I think, one thing I'd like to believe now is that we have enough decentralization of wealth where maybe back then, like one or two people who were like, this is not happening, could have basically were able to, if the US government or the French government, whatever, like, we don't want this, like, no one else has the money. Whereas at least now you have like Elon can bankroll whatever, if it's, if that's deemed like important enough. Uh, but I do just generally feel like everything that is annoying, like, will not be a thing that you have to think about, right? Like for example, like you have to like call your bank, or you have to like deal with an airline change, like all of those kind of things that you have to do. Or like think about how much the healthcare industry is full of like these kind of interactions. I
Definitely.
assume like those things will just kind of dissipate, and you just won't even have to think about it as much anymore. Like they'll just be kind of like, you'll just have an app on your phone and you'll say, I want this to happen, and then you'll kind of have an agent interact with their agent and figure it out and come to a conclusion. I think the way disputes might get resolved, I think public defenders and like a lot of these cases, like I think startups have a big, we generally have a huge blind spot for like things like housing, things like healthcare, things like government, because we don't generally sell to them because they're not free markets, they're not as we generally build for like consumers, people who use the internet, whatever, right? And so like, but I feel like AI will. I mean, like imagine like how sort of just basically screwed like how few resources cities have compared to their population, right? Like when I talk to somebody from like some small town, they're like, we have like one electrician for like everybody, or like we can't do the housing reviews fast enough, or like what if AI, could help scale all these roles? Like, right, like there's so many of these functions that are completely underwater. Housing, permitting, road construction, like weather prediction. I mean, there are all these things that I think like,
Yeah,
yeah,
even
humans.
like infrastructure projects cost so much, and I think there's a lot of ways in which AI would like help you better model them. You're right, where there's a million applications where I actually think it's like,
And to be honest, I think one of the biggest things is I think one of the reasons things take so long is just politics, frankly. And so I personally think the number one, and Isaac Asimov has a great sort of short story about this. But basically, there's these machines that run the world, and like there's like it's not like humans vote for other humans to run the world. It's like humans vote for basically code changes to this machine that actually makes all the decisions. Like for example, who gets to decide the interest rate? A human, right, or a set of humans, right? And that you may agree with them, disagree with them, but like right now, it's that's what it is. My guess is 100 years from now, you may have one country that has like some AI, open source kind of published AI models, and it basically looks at the internet, looks at the data, and says like, based on these signals or these, the prices of these things, like the interest rate changes. It's all a little bit like crypto, honestly. I think crypto paints a lot of the idealism of what this future might look like. It just never sort of executed fully. Um, but I imagine some of the sort of like the autonomous agent, trust, lack of human in the loop, sort of a lot of those elements, I think will probably find their way into just like fiat world, right? Like the government, healthcare. But definitely, I'm
and
down.
it's not necessarily bad. And I think that's
No,
the
yeah, and
bigger,
I mean, I do think at the end of the day, it does suck for some people, right? Because at the end of the day, there will be like in any game of musical chairs, there's going to be one person that is that no longer has a chair, right? And so definitely there will be, certain people who, no longer have jobs but at least that skill that they were good at, like for example, you might have been a painter of like I think Charles Darwin was like a painter, like he would go out and he would like you found a new flower you'd never seen before, like the way you showed people was you painted it and we're like, check this out, I saw this thing over there, and they're like, holy crap, this we actually have not seen this anywhere else, like we need to go get a sample of this, that. And then he's like, crap, I'm out of a job because of the camera, so I got to go to the Galapagos Islands if I want to make a living, basically. And he was like, I can't make a living, I'm going to go bounce for 4 years, and like that's like what led to,
yeah,
I mean, insane, right? So
yeah,
that's it's sort of like I think you have to be empathetic to the fact that capitalism does sort of destroy certain jobs, um, but also like the sort of the sort of long term of it is like there is a hedonistic treadmill we're on, but like it gets us somewhere.
yeah,
We're
definitely,
headed to a world. And as a consumer, it's going to be a lot better. Like definitely everything's going to get cheaper. If you think about like the cost of a lot of goods, it's labor, like labor and materials, right? So half of that is going to go to zero over time. So effectively, the cost of a house over time will trend to that cost of the materials
totally.
because the labor itself
Also,
will be
maybe
up.
I mean, there's like Sam Altman invested in or was a part of WorldCoin, which is like UBI. So I think there'll be who knows how that will play out, like depending on sort of how many
Yeah,
jobs
ultimately,
are displaced or
will.
changed.
Yeah. I do worry. I mean, Mark Andreessen has a good blog post about this where he talks about how we already have UBI, which is basically government jobs. Which in Spain, I think 40% of the population works for the government. So in a way, like I feel like what tends to happen is like we could be in a world that could be much more prosperous, could have a lot less people working, um, but would have UBI, um, but also would have this sort of big asterisk, which would have basically a lot of people not working. And I think generally society is very scared of that. Like I think we're very scared policy wise. We're very scared of like what happens when you take a bunch of people, for example, truck drivers, 8 million truck drivers, mostly men. Uh, and mostly people who like to gamble and lottery and drink and do whatever. And and that's totally fine. But like, what happens when you unemploy all of them in a 10-year period? Um, I don't like politicians. Even the most liberal or the most conservative or the most libertarian will probably have some doubts about that, right? And
Yeah,
they want they
definitely.
will have, they have obligations.
I think the transitions are very tough. I don't know if this is fully accurate. I remember, I don't know if I was watching it or reading it, something about, because I think truck drivers is often an example used, but it was basically saying like there's an upcoming void of actually like the next generation doesn't seek out to be truck drivers, and there might not be enough truck drivers going
Yeah, I mean,
forward.
this is
So it
something.
is this thing where like certain jobs almost do age out. Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
that transition can be extremely painful and also messy. And it's like humans are meant to be busy. And in terms of the other economic issues that we are facing, or sort of what's to come, I guess like I've seen you interact with Balaji on Twitter before. And he recently made that bet that Bitcoin will hit $1 million by I think June 17th. What do you think about that bet? Or he's a really smart person, so why do you think he made the bet?
yeah. I mean, I think he made the bet. I think in reaction to somebody who was sort of set up the terms to be very insane, like ludicrous. I think most people, I think, would think that the terms of the bet were insane. So I think it was a tweet that someone made, and then Balaji was like, "Fine, I'll take you up on this bet because I believe that there's going to be massive amounts of inflation, and like people need to own Bitcoin, and like this is a way for me to." Maybe he was looking for a way to sort of put up the bit signal, he calls it, or whatever, but like put $1 million on the line or whatever, and this was like the thing, the right, kind of like the opportunity that struck, right? Like you have to be open to that. And I think, uh, I think if you said, hey, uh, you have to put your life on the line, I don't think he would do it personally. I think there's like, $1 million to him is different than most people. And people have speculated about how much Bitcoin he owns and this and that and all this sort of stuff. But I think Balaji's a super honest, truthful, good guy. And so I think the sort of Occam's razor of it is like he really believes, like a lot of people do, that like governments being able to print money willy-nilly will eventually like not work. And Bitcoin seems to be like sort of the best alternative. And that's true over a 50-year time horizon. Um, and then the sort of, I think the nuance of the bet is mostly just like this
Will it
was a
get there
thing
by
that,
that date?
well, it's like it was like a thing that kind of the lightning that hit the bottle, and it became a little thing, and it blew up probably, I assume, more than anyone really intended. But at the end of the day, I also think like Balaji was right about COVID. I think he was like earlier to that sort of than anybody else. Almost, I think like he was probably the first like person with more than 100,000 followers that like was willing. Like I know a lot of people who were speculating about it, but willing to put his brand reputation a little bit on the line for that. I think so. I sort of think he gets some points, right? Like I think I'm like, okay, yeah, like I would do it. Would I make the bet? No, um, but I feel like I'm willing to at least respect the person who's making the bet. And
Totally. And if he believes that it will get there at some point, and he believes in Bitcoin, then it's sort of like a good opportunity to also just like bring attention to like why he believes in it and
Yeah, I mean,
why it's
people bet
important
on
and
their favorite
what's happening
sports teams all the time, right? Like
now.
Drake bet millions of dollars on his favorite sports teams, and guess what? Like sometimes he wins, sometimes he loses. When he wins, it's a big viral Instagram meme story thing. When he loses, it's like heads I win, tails I win, right? That sort of thing. Uh, and so yeah, you're gonna make the bet that sort of aligns with your brand, your personality. I'm not like
Definitely.
I'm not going to bet. I'm not going to short Gumroad. Even though I'm sure someone could say, "Oh, well, do you think Gumroad is going to be $100 billion company?" Like, no, I'd probably short that prediction. But
Yeah.
why?
Another current event that I think everyone's been watching this week is the CEO of TikTok is in front of Congress. Do you think it should be banned or bought? Do you have any strong opinion on it?
I'm not watching it super closely. I would say my buy like it. I have been biased because I do see tweets and stuff about it. So like my opinion is unfortunately like formed already by, it's like I have the opinion, like it's weird how I have an opinion even though I haven't actually thought about it, which is it's just a weird, right? Like the fact that I have seen enough tweets to program me from people I respect and trust, and so my bias is toward them. But basically, that would say that we should ban it. Like basically, the smart people, um, um, they're kind of like anti-China or whatnot. They think that there's. I think that sort of there's like the anti-China take. There's like the fact that this would just be good for the American economy to do. There's a bunch of reasons maybe, but my contrarian take to that would be, well, it's like we haven't banned it, so why ban it now, right? Like they're like we haven't banned other things, like this is a very big deal if we do, and what is like the strong reasoning behind it? um and they're all the more reasons, the more skeptical I am. Like to me, it's like it's kind of like when you're like, hey, do you want to hang out, and your friend is like, oh, I have my grandma's in town and I'm also kind of tired. I'm like, just give me one reason. Like if you have five reasons, I don't believe you. Just like you're sick, fine. So I feel like with TikTok, I'm kind of like there, where I'm like, there's like a million reasons that are okay, and I'm like, but all I need is one good reason. Like show me that the Chinese government is doing like, and then come up with a
Yeah.
policy and let's implement the yeah, like if it's owned by Russia, like we shouldn't have maybe like the Russian government shouldn't be able to have apps, but then there's like sanction, like I don't know, there's ways to. So my
Definitely.
view is
I think it's like if there was sort of evidence, which there probably is, like I'm sure there's so much also that we just haven't been clued into of just like top down
yeah.
affecting the algorithm.
And
I'm
I'll
sure
say
that like the algorithm's different.
my biggest bias, like the reason I'm against banning it is and this is something I think I disagree with a lot of people on, is I'm very I have a very pro human take, which is that humans are not addicted to this stuff at all. Like I think it looks like that sometimes, but I've never really seen someone who, like, when they get to do something more interesting in real life with their friends or at the pool or in nature or whatever, like is like, no, like generally people are on TikTok because they're like on the toilet or they're in line or like they're trying to like meet girls or like whatever. There's like a bunch of reasons to do it. But guess what? Like when you have kids, it's not like 40-year-olds are addicted to this stuff. Like they're busy with their own priorities in life. Like, so, and I don't know. I talk to lots of kids and I've never been, maybe I need to hang out with more kids, but like I haven't felt like they're screwed in the head at some profoundly deep level. I think somehow humans are very adaptable, and like we give them the internet, we give them porn, we give them gambling, we give them phones, we give them Pokemon, like whatever, and like it seems like we survive, like every generation is still able to do really good stuff, right? I don't know, I'm super optimistic. I really don't think that like this stuff will is addictive. I think human it's like when you stare at a like when you look at a tree outside, and you look at a photo of a tree, it's completely different. And like I think it's going to take so much more, like for like you know your phone to be as addictive as a physical drug. Like it's just your body is so, your eye, your vision. Like I learned this when painting, where like if you want to paint a tree, if you actually look at the complexity of a tree, it you can't do it. It literally would take you your whole life. There's so much complexity happening in real life, with organic forms, right? Versus you take a photo with your phone and you can do it in a few hours. You don't realize how much information is taken away from the phone. Real life is very stimulating. Like
Yeah.
rivers, like trying to produce a natural sound on your computer is hard. Like coming up with weird, interesting sounds in real life is super easy. Just do this. So like, come up with like lots of cool sounds. Like do that on like with your with Python, right? With code, it's like really hard. You go or whatever, but like you can't make an interesting sound. I mean, so anyway, I just think people get, and I think what happens is people have kids and then they become very protective of their kids.
Yeah.
Um, so it's easy to be like, oh, this stuff is going to ruin the children, or it's going to ruin this, or everyone's screwed, or whatever. But I don't know. I think everyone thinks that, and then you get to like you get to a certain age, and you just kind of become your parents again. Like it seems like you just we're like we're not as malleable as we think, or whatnot.
There's a lot more core fundamentals to humans that we're not, even though we are malleable and we're like very much affected by our environment, like these these things to date haven't like completely corrupted us and made us these like, sort of passive, stupid things living in our,
Yeah.
sitting
Oh,
on our
my
sofa,
attention
and that's
span
not going
is
to
so
happen.
bad. My attention span's so bad. It's like it's not that bad. It's just that like most books are not very good. And if you like are guess what? When you have an engaging conversation with a friend, like you are pretty I mean, like at least I maybe people are truthfully like addicted, but like generally I've had plenty of conversations recently that
Yeah.
you just have a conversation. I'm not like
I
browsing my
think I think it definitely goes both ways for sure 100%. I don't think anything is also like bad or good. And I don't even think I would
phone.
never think TikTok should ever be banned because it's addicting because meta reels are the exact same thing but arguably just worse right now. They're like 2 months behind everything on TikTok. That's like the joke of like the trends that are happening. So the technology's there. Short form is not going away. I like watch a video of interview clip on TikTok and it's right next to an avocado being sliced with music behind it. Like the point is they're already feeding into like our crazy, even if our attention spans are getting shorter, I don't think you can like government's going to say like we're going to stop making short form videos that way that are going to make people
Yeah.
want more
Yeah.
stimulation. I think it's more of a geopolitical situation of whether it's dangerous for, China to have like control over basically the minds of like half of America, which I
I
would argue is probably just not a good idea. But
yeah.
also, it's
It's just kind of like it's just I just think like Americans do what the hell they want. Like if Trump said something they didn't like, all his supporters would be like, "Screw you." Like I just think at the end of the day, like it's like the artists are chosen by the audience, right? At the end of the day, you are making content for the algorithm in a way, and so like TikTok is doing what Americans want. More like I think people underrate how much that feedback like as someone who runs a company, like I just do what my customers want me to do because I know that if they really want something, like going back to humans are going to get what they want. If they want short form video, they're going to get short form video.
yeah.
They're going to get it from me, and if they don't get it from me, they're going to get it from somebody else. And like humans get what they want. I grew up in Singapore. Singapore like bans porn and legalizes prostitution because that's how badly they want people to like actually hook up in real life. But guess what? Like you could look at the fertility rates. Like humans, behavior is human behavior. Like I think, people are like, oh, women aren't having enough kids. It's like, well, guess my prediction is they don't want to. That's why.
It's interesting that that's how you view like putting out a product or running your company. And I think it's interesting to me because you built this like amazing Twitter following. You have so many good one-liners, Sahil. Like just what is your like day to day? What's it like to be you and like pick up your phone and tweet something or interact with almost 300,000 people?
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, it was very much like I was in Singapore and I wanted to meet more tech startup-y people, and Hacker News and Twitter were kind of like the formats or the communities, online uh, that's what they were using. And so I just kind of started that way, and I would just like literally I would just build an audience member by like a comment on Hacker News, and then they would click through to my profile, and they don't even, Hacker News doesn't even have hyperlinks, so you have to copy paste the link to Twitter and then follow. And so it was that's kind of really how I built it, like very much like just commenting on Hacker News, and tweeting, and then slowly they retweeting, and the algorithm like has this nice like exponential effect after a little while. Um, and now it's I mean I still try to stay pretty consistent to like I like my through line I like to believe is just like I think everyone should be able to like be own their own business and be free, like basically like I think the path to freedom is capitalism, and like I'm not like politically but just generally being able to sell a product to a market. You don't have a boss, you don't have a gatekeeper, you can like become famous on TikTok instead of like wait for Warner Brothers to get a record deal, right? And so that's kind of a lot of what I like to say. um but I think my rule now is like I just want to say things that are like that only really I can say that I think are really trying to push the frontier of knowledge, which means I don't tweet as much, to be honest. Like I think that's a difference. Is like I don't think of my Twitter account as like a company I am building where I'm like, oh, every day I have to tweet and do this. It's just like
Mhm.
a diary, basically. It's like when I learn something new about AI or something if I have a thought that I really feel like I haven't had before, um, and like I'll tweet it basically, and that's kind of like it's. I don't really use drafts a ton. Like I really just like have a thought, and then I'm like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the fact that like like for like I've been working on this internal tool at Gumroad to automate some support, and I think that customer support as a role is going to change to sales. Um, and like a lot of people, I think would write like a long thread about like this or whatever. But for whatever reason, I like just taking like the pithy, customer support like becomes customer sales. I don't even know what the tweet is. I haven't thought about it enough. But eventually, I'll have a conversation with someone about this. In the conversation, I'll say something, right? I'll be like, "Oh, we're building this tool. It turns like all of our customer support people into salespeople," and then like a process in my brain will just basically be like, "That should be a tweet. Like you should tweet that."
Yeah.
Basically.
By the way, when I like that's actually I feel like I experienced that the one time I met you in person at coffee, because I was talking about how the city debate on Twitter always gets so much attention, and it's like so interesting that people in tech get so riled up, like, which makes no sense, because it's like valid that there are probably a couple cities worth living in and they have pros and cons, and like you can kind of do tech well in any of them. And you said something about how like people in tech don't care about sports, so cities just act as like the sports teams. Like sports teams are really masks for city pride, so we just go like straight to that. And I was thinking,
Yeah.
you said it in a one line, like pithy, really sort of straightforward way, and I was like, oh my gosh, duh. And it was so interesting. So it's cool that I think you've kind of, I think it's like a muscle where like if you build it out enough times and you get used
Yeah.
to just like uh putting the thoughts out there that way, like you're definitely really good at it. So
And I would say the other thing is I try to live in or it's not that I try to live in a space, but I do spend a lot of time like reading papers and listening to audiobooks. And I try to like, I really try not to consume the content that, like, the reason I don't really listen to a lot of podcasts and newsletters and stuff is not because they're not great. I still like, I do on like when I find interesting episodes, right? But I just find if you're regularly listening to something, you're kind of listening to the same thing everybody else is listening to. But if you're like reading, like right now I'm reading Snowball, which is about Warren Buffett. And guess what? There was a bunch of bank bailouts because of a liquidity crisis. I think it happened like in the 70s, happened in the 90s, maybe it even happened in the 80s. And guess what happened? A bunch of the regional banks flew to Omaha to talk to Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett and I think Goldman like bought a bunch of stuff that they had to give them a bunch of liquidity. Guess what happened last week, right? Like the exact same thing. And yet, how many people on Twitter are currently reading Snowball about Warren Buffett? And like you could come up with amazing content, amazing tweets that would be super valuable that no one has done if you just happen to be reading this book
yeah.
at the right.
Well, I think it's
And
like,
even because I haven't finished the book yet.
yeah. But I think
Yeah, it's just I
history,
just try to.
yeah, I think history repeats itself in a way where like reading about history or reading concrete things that happened are really important. Like I love reading biographies, but I see what you're saying, where if you're always just ingesting other people's opinions that are actually probably just like reworded versions of other people's opinions, it's hard to create
Yeah.
an environment where you can have a truly unique thought.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
and I think that's really what I want to do on Twitter is I want to have unique thoughts. Like I want to say things that, yeah, I'm sure like it's like, oh, it's a variation of something else, right? Of course. But like, and I'll check Twitter and be like, oh wow, no one has come up with this simple thing. And the other thing is like, well, if you don't follow what other people follow, then what do you follow? Like, how do you find the
Yeah.
stuff you don't know, right? If you don't know them, and my answer is always like, well, just like try to get yourself to a place in which there are things that you need to consume. It's just not what other people need to consume. Like for example, like the reason I'm reading the Warren Buffett thing is because I manage a rolling fund with AngelList, and I need to like figure out like how do I grow this thing like over the next 10 20 30 40 years, like how much of an investor do I want to be, what does that look like over a long period of time. I've been thinking about turning Gumroad into potentially acquiring other companies and kind of turning into a kind of a software you want, like a Berkshire Hathaway type thing. So anyway, I've been like thinking about this stuff. I was like, well, I should probably like know like how like Warren Buffett's been doing this for like 50 60 years, and like no one's been but people are not tweeting about books about Warren Buffett because he's not super relevant
Yeah.
right now. Anyway, I just went to Audible and I literally just like found the
Totally.
book, and it was great. And it would be a great content strategy to take it and turn it into tweets too. But that or like reading about AI or implementing papers, like I'm just trying to
Yeah.
trying to just solve problems, stay in the cutting edge, and then if you do, you realize how few people are there.
I ordered your book, The Minimalist Entrepreneur. It is en route to me, so I haven't got to read it yet, but I'd like read summaries. But anyway, I'm really excited to read that. And thank you so much, Sahil, for coming on the show. I have like always been very like interested in your Twitter account, but I think you have so many thoughts where it's like, you know, those amount of characters don't get to fully expose them. So I feel very honored for you to have you on Tomorrow Talk, and I really appreciate you coming on. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.
Thank you. It was super fun. Isaac Asimov has a great sort of short story about this. Basically, there's these machines that run the world. My guess is 100 years from now, you may have one country that has published AI models, looks at the internet, looks at the data, and says, like, you know, the interest rate changes